Bodies seated, neatly organized in pews, heads bowed occasionally, subdued physicality in quiet attention. Ears perked, listening to sounds. Eyes directed towards the altar. Minds churning the sermon's meat, nutrition for the soul. Sitting, standing, and sitting again. Lines of supplicants orderly processing all together in unison. A community united in ritual accord. Orderly, demure, highly civilized worship. The sacred moves as wind through the world. A gentle whisper of suggestion as soft as down feathering against my cheek. And other times she rushes in, whipping up storms of chaos as her path carves change in her wake. Sometimes she stands on street corners, yelling the names of justice, hoping to be heard above the cacophony of individualism masked as freedom. And always, she is the breath of stillness that pauses time and space, birthing love and mercy. Breaking open and healing the broken places of the heart, inviting all into the dance of the divine. Bodies, free from constraints, moving like the wind, no longer suspect, but immersed in the dance of divine integration. Distinctions blur as flesh moves, spirit moves flesh. Spirit incarnate knows no bounds.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to what I hope will be a very interesting and enlightening panel discussion on embodied spirituality. My name is Sarah Carlson, and I am a choreographer, an educator, and the founding artistic director of DanceLink, which is a project-based company that seeks to bridge people, ideas, and understanding through the power of movement. With any luck, you've just watched a screening of Moving Spirit, which is a DanceLink community collaboration with Moravian Seminary. And this discussion will serve to unpack some of the major themes of Moving Spirit, as well as offer perspective from some of those who were engaged in its production. But first, I want to welcome my three esteemed panelists and to thank them for sharing their time and perspectives with us. And I want to go ahead and ask them each to introduce themselves so our viewers can go ahead and connect a name with a face right from the start. So Marcella, let's start with you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Marcella Kraybill-Greggo, and I serve as Director of the Formative Spirituality and Spiritual Direction Program at Moravian Seminary, and I have been delighted to partner with Sarah in this project.
Super. Jenica.
My name is Jenica Borger, and I'm the chaplain at Moravian College and Theological Seminary, and received my certificate in spiritual direction in May, and was able to be part of this project with Sarah, and got to tap into my dancing spirit from childhood again, and so it was just super fun. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And last but not least,
I'm Maggie Wellard. I am delighted to be here. I am an ordained pastor in the Moravian Church and a spiritual director, graduating this May in the same program that Jenica did, and having worked for the last several years in the wisdom school at the seminary, getting very deeply in touch with the varied ways in which we know, especially through our body.
Wonderful. So I am really pleased that you all can be here and really enrich this discussion. So first up, we're going to start with this little launching place. So Moving Spirit is a work that comments upon the body and its history within the Christian church as being on a continuum. So some early Christian teaching saw the body as an object to be controlled, tamed, subdued, and almost overcome en route to connect with God. And within some early Christian teaching, particularly within the mystics, right from the start, the body was seen as the temple, sacred, incarnational, something to be celebrated, honored, and carefully listened to. So we have these two perspectives going on. And I know we're all coming from different backgrounds and have our own perspectives on this, which are informed by our own experience. And we'll get to that in just a bit. But since the video was created on the campus of Moravian Seminary, I think it makes sense to start by looking at the Moravian practice of worship and the body's role within it historically. What can we say about that?
There isn't the Moravian I would say, because the Moravian Church is a worldwide church, the expression that happens in worship is very much fed by the culture. So white Indo-European folk tend to be rather still, and we limit our sacred gesture kind of movement to standing up, sitting down, and possibly, if you're really extreme, kneeling. But our Caribbean brothers and sisters incorporate liturgical dance. They stand up, they move, they clap their hands, they engage bodily. I have not been part of African worship, but the limited things that I've seen on video, I think the same is true there. So it tends to be more cultural than defined by what the definition of Moravian worship is, because there is no single definition.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Maggie, about that. Rooted certainly in the German Stoicism, the Moravians went into the world and decided not to bring their culture into the worship service. And so to try to bring the Christian practices that would then be able to partner with the culture of the community. And so the cultural influences throughout the world on Moravian worship are so eclectic and beautiful and wonderful, and can be experienced in different ways in each different congregation as well.
Super. Yeah, I really like that acknowledgement of the global phenomenon of the Moravian Church, and having the culture being what is determining how the body is invited or not into that space. So I think this work as primarily reacting or sort of making a stance in response to what has been my own experience of the body within Christian worship. And so I'll go ahead and take us into the next question, because I was not raised within the Moravian Church. I was raised within the United Methodist Church. So still within the Protestant realm. But I grew up with a sanctuary filled with pews and lines of congregants, and bodies mostly stationary and still in those pews, except when we would stand to sing. People involved in the service would process down the center aisle. And then the only other chance for movement would be at communion, where we would be asked to leave our pews and would process up to the front altar and kneel and receive the sacrament. So my own experience growing up in the United Methodist Church, was how the body was invited in, or expected to behave within worship settings. What was your experience?
So I was raised actually Mennonite, and but was born in Tanzania, East Africa. So we participated both in the Swahili-speaking local church and in the Anglican local church. So in the Anglican, it was much more proper and less movement. And in the Swahili local church, much more body-centric and engaged with, clapping and swaying and full body engagement, which was really an important, I think, impact on how I came to see the body as a part of worship. When we moved back here to the United States when I was 6, the Mennonite church that I was a part of, we would do communion twice a year, which included foot washing. So that was a way of engaging our bodies. We would partner with somebody else and wash each other's feet, as well as probably once a month, we would be invited to kneel at our pews. So that was a part of the embodiment of prayer, but otherwise pretty pretty, sit in the pew, sometimes stand, obviously for singing, but a little less bodily engaged, for sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I heard you say the word proper within the Anglican Church. And again, what's considered proper
Yeah.
is variable, depending upon the culture that you're in. But very interesting that within the Anglican tradition, that what's considered proper is to be controlled, to be still. To still the body so that the spirit can be enriched. Maggie or Jenica?
I was noticing you used the word, Sarah, behave. And that really landed when you said it in a way that captured my imagination. And I'm remembering when my children were little. And because everybody around you doesn't want children to be disruptive, it's constantly be still, sit still, and you carry this treasure trove of things that will help them be occupied so that they will be still and behave. And that's beyond this conversation, but it makes me wonder, is the word behave, again, only a cultural word? And how did it seep into that there's a particular behavior? King David danced before the moving altar of the Lord and got in trouble with some people for doing it. But, within the rich, broad tradition, movement is there. And yet I'm going to say for Europeans, we seem to have been dominated much more by that Middle Ages judgment that made women somehow attached to less than even evil, but that the things that come easily and normally to women were structured down. I'm just playing with that. I don't have a formula, but it really captured me when you said behave. And what is it that God actually expects of us in that? Does God expect us to behave? And what does that mean and look like in the context of worship, where we do talk about spirit and the movement of the spirit and the flow of the spirit, but we don't usually move or flow very much, so we're just,
Yeah, there seems to be this separation between body and spirit, this sort of binary, that one has to be still so that the spirit can flow, or so that we can focus on spirit. Jenica, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, that was actually, the binary piece was what I was going to focus on a little bit for myself. I grew up in a non-religious household, very spiritual, not religious, and my experience of religion was the don'ts.
Yeah.
Particularly with movement, is yes, be still, hold still, and couldn't wait to get out of the building, to break free and to run and dance and be with nature. And that was where I absolutely found the divine, running through the woods rather than in the pews of the church. And yet there was something going on in there also. So there was this, it was contained, and I felt like it was bursting out of me, but I could definitely feel it when I was in the sanctuary. And so it was almost as if I could feel that spirit being so held in tightly in everyone, and then I would need to somehow go express it. So it was good in both places, yet very different in both places.
I really appreciate you saying that, because I think one of the things that I've pondered over the last maybe decade or two is that this distinction of body and spirit, and in which the body gets the negativity. On the other hand, we don't really want to let the spirit loose either. because the spirit then is out of our control and unpredictable. And so we have a pretty narrow theology around the Holy Spirit. And I say that we generally, for maybe most mainline, I don't think we want this spirit to go dancing among us because it's going to disrupt life too much, and we want to be in control. And you know, maybe there's something really significant in that the word control, which takes all the way back to Genesis and what's the optimum sin? I want to be like God. I want to be in charge, but I want to control everything. So just sort of that thought grew out of what Jenica just said.
Yeah, that's so interesting, that notion of control and how that plays into not just the body, but also our spirit and our spiritual appetites as well as our physical appetites. And also linked with sin, the doctrine of sin. So I want to just also mention that, you know, I had this experience within the United Methodist Church. I should say that although that was, you know, what I described was normal, while I studied dance growing up, it was known within my church that I was a dancer. And when I was in middle school, I was invited, middle school and high school, I was invited to create and perform liturgical dance in my church. So there was this welcoming of movement and of dance. But I found that I was the only one doing it. It just felt weird because, first of all, I had never experienced that before in worship. And here I am being asked to do it, and I jumped at the opportunity. But I also felt odd, and it never sort of left me, that this dis-ease of bringing my body and expressing my spirituality in a church, which should, in theory, be natural and normal, but it wasn't somehow. And that stayed with me for a long time, and eventually sort of was one of the major questions that I built my master's research around. You know, the fact that they even asked me to perform, I think, is evidence of how things have changed recently. And so let's go into our next topic for discussion, which is, you know, we've been talking about this deep groove within the Anglo mainstream expression of Christian worship in the West, this groove of control, of stillness of the body. But I think that there has absolutely been a lot of change, particularly within the last few decades. And so how have you seen this shifting for yourselves?
I think one of the ways that I have seen it, particularly in writing and how it landed in me, is through the wisdom tradition that I was introduced through Cynthia Bourgeau's book, particularly The Wisdom Way of Knowing, in which she talks about us having 3 centers of knowing: intellectual center, heart or emotional center, and movement center. And I have to say, when I received that teaching, something landed like, yes, this is exactly what I knew as a child. This is exactly what I experienced in Africa, where all 3 are honored in equal proportion, and all 3 bring a knowing that can't be accessed by only the other dimension. And I have to say that that has been a basis for Barb Martel and I, our training in our spiritual direction training at Moravian, to say, and how does this land in the body? Mm-hmm. What are you noticing about God or about life, about wholeness, as you notice the sensations or the movement, not only in your head, not only in your heart, those are absolutely vital, but also through your body, that we are incarnational, made in the image of God, whole, beautiful. And how do we use, and how do we not know more about God, but know with more of ourselves engaged, know God with more of all of who we are. And I would say that has been the most impactful recent in the last decade of my own formation.
I am blessed to have grandchildren that I get to pay more attention to than I did to children, because I was too busy when I was raising kids. You know, you're watching everything, doing everything. But what I notice about my grandchildren is that from the time they can, even before they can stand, but definitely by the time they stand, they dance, they move, they shake, music comes on, and man, they just start moving and moving. And, you know, that you've used the word a couple of times, the incarnational, that this is the primary theology of Christianity, that God took on human life, took on this, and so this is sacred and holy, and that the movement is really important. And again, we just don't live up to what we say we believe about it. And for me, that has been significant in the wisdom school, and being able to give voice to what I knew in my own body, but I couldn't have taught anybody or shared because I didn't have the language and the experience for it. But it just feels to me just so amazing. And then when I learned way back in seminary, learned this word perichoresis, which is how the Eastern Church talks about the Trinity, and that God, in and of God's self, is this dynamic, moving, outpouring, receiving. And the word perichoresis means something like dance circle. And so it ought to be foundational about who we are, and yet we live this tension of pushback and control. And I could see Jenica smiling. I know there's the same thing is bubbling in her.
Absolutely, Maggie. And that for me is also entwined in the feminine expression of the sacred that's come out.
Yeah.
I mean, women have been trying to do this for a long time, but I think this reclaiming of women's bodies for me has been very important in understanding how spirit moves through our bodies. Mm-hmm. And birthing images, and that the feminine sacred is holy, and that our bodies are something to celebrate. And that to me has been, that was part of how I was raised, and yet that wasn't how the culture around me felt, particularly inside of the church building. And I think that now, even with the Me Too movement, that the honoring of our feminine bodies has some depth to it now. It's taking root in our churches again, and I think that, you know, that's coming up in our children, and in this being able to move and express our faith through our bodies.
Mm-hmm. I had, you know, one of the things that we learn in wisdom school is body prayer, and one in particular that we use frequently. And 2 summers ago, I was doing a lot of preaching in churches all around, Lutheran, Presbyterian, Moravian. And I just experimented that summer with, somehow in the context of every single sermon that I preached, I found a reason to teach the congregation, invite them to stand up and do body prayer. One of my Moravian friends now calls this Moravian calisthenics. But every single congregation, the people got up and did it. Now, I was the visiting pastor, so you know, a whole different world from this settled pastor. But in every congregation, I didn't see anybody roll their eyes. Nobody. They were like, "Oh, okay, I'll try this," and then attaching our usual sacred words to the movement of whichever way we're going. They seem to be absolutely like delighted. I'm not saying they'd like a steady diet, but the experiment was, okay, people are not as close to this as we make the assumption that they are.
And I would piggyback on that after getting language for what I sensed already through this wisdom tradition that says, you know, if we are only doing the intellectual or only emotional, we're asleep. We need the movement part as well. And that information and knowledge goes in deeper when we engage the body. I said, that's it. Every class, I'm going to have a body movement part so that my students can engage the material with more of themselves engaged. And everybody has been open and just happy. You know, it's like they've been through all day long sitting. And so there's an engagement piece that adds a piece of fun and lightness, but it's actually an intelligence center that people tend to respond to. Not everybody, but.
And I think it helps us we tap into what we already know.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So we were born this way to know in our bodies. And then we learned somewhere along the way that was not sacred. And now it just brings us back to ourselves again. And I remember the first time that I took communion, after having the language around this, around the three-centered knowing and knowing in our bodies, is that, you know, that to hear the words, this is my body.
Yes.
That incarnational, like that's, oh my goodness, like that exploded in me.
Yeah. And it, you know, I can remember growing up in a tradition in which the word incarnation was always spelled with a capital I and only defined Jesus, as if that were the only way. And yet, you know, I'd say the change over the last 20 years for me is to be able to realize, oh, that's me too. You know, and the communion piece matters so much to me because it is that matter of when we do go and receive and take and bring it in, and that when I eat this bread and drink this particular cup, then my own body digests it, and that through the mystery of whatever is going on, that means that Jesus is present in my own body too, and that the Spirit is present here, literally in my cells, in my own flesh and blood. And that's just like, whoo, expanded totally my grasp of what was going on and what our profession is and what does lie in the DNA of the Christian community.
So it sounds like this understanding of the body as something to be included and invited back into the space of worship has been something that you as leaders within the church and educators have been sort of tapping into for the last couple of years, especially with the introduction of the wisdom work. And I wanted to riff on something that I know Cynthia Bourgeot says, it's not about knowing more, it's about knowing with more of you. And so inviting the body into the space and into this, you know, understanding it to be something that knows, that contains knowledge and can be a vehicle for understanding and for thinking and for processing, that only enriches the spiritual life, one's experience of the sacred.
Absolutely.
So this, I think, conversation is traveling very nicely to the next segue that I want to make, which is the origins of the Moving Spirit project itself. So I goodness, 8 years ago now, I think, was first invited by Marcella to practice something called InterPlay with her spiritual direction groups, and actually a variety of her class populations. But InterPlay is a movement, a body-based creative practice that uses stories, stillness, silence, and song. I'm not necessarily saying them all in the right order, but it really is a practice that helps us become more embodied, listen and tap into our body wisdom in a very playful, sneaky deep kind of way. It is easily adaptable to a variety of different contexts and purposes. And so we adapted it to the needs of the spiritual direction community. And over time, over a period of years, I developed a relationship with not only Marcella, but with the cohort, the community of spiritual directors at Moravian. And I had the chance to witness incredible beauty over a course of years. And that beauty was the expression of the soul, of the spirit through the moving body. In often very spontaneous, uncalculated, unchoreographed ways. And I found them to be profoundly moving. And so that ended up being the inspiration for this project. I wanted to somehow provide an opportunity for others to be able to appreciate that same beauty. And so I came together and said, Marcella, what do you think? And can you get me a cohort of spiritual directors who might be interested in moving along with dancers from my company? So Moving Spirit was made up of 3 professional dancers and 5 spiritual directors. Mm-hmm. And the process was very much hinging on sourcing movement from the participants themselves. So I gave them a series of tasks, first to sort of capture in writing or poetry what the sacred was for them, and then trying to translate those ideas into movement. And then we did the same with how our experience of body within worship has been, and translating that to movement. And I really find that tapping into the creative juices and the personal experiences of my cast members really invites a richness and a level of authenticity and vulnerability from my dancers that I can't get at any other way. And so that was definitely what was at the core of the movement piece and the movement generation for Moving Spirit. I'd love to hear from Marcella and Jenica about how that process was to live through as a participant.
So I can say, Sarah, that I'm touched again. In fact, tears came to my eyes when you said, you know, you found this beautiful community in the moving, in inviting them to move in InterPlay. And I think it has been so profound because people who sign up for a spiritual direction training program or just are in the community have this deep longing to love and to know God so deeply. And when you combine that with expression in the body, it is very sneaky deep. And it is often tender and evocative and emotional. And it's not uncommon to have tears or laughter, either or. And so when you invited this, I'm like, yes, absolutely, because it's been such a celebration. And I would say the summer held pockets of that. It was very different than we expected, right? Because all of a sudden we had planned this pre-COVID. And all of a sudden we were doing this virtually and sometimes with masks and very socially distant. And even with those constrictions, very powerful and very moving. I would often go home and what we did would live in me and breathe in me and or what I witnessed. It's not only moving, it's watching other bodies move. That's so tender and moving. And even watching the video again, it's like, oh my word. And that was just 15 minutes of these 6 hours that we did together. So yeah, very, very powerful. What do you remember, Jenica? What do you have to add?
Yeah, it was such an invitation to remember how to move my body as prayer. That, you know, that was my childhood. And so to do that in a group was super vulnerable.
Mhm.
I haven't danced in front of anyone in probably 20 years. And so,
Besides your kids.
besides my kids who roll their eyes at me, but that to give that vulnerability to the group and to receive that vulnerability from the group was so moving and so intense for me, particularly and mostly a group of strangers, and to feel that we didn't speak to one another much. We danced together, and I felt like this group of people knew me better than a lot of people know me from dancing together. And that witness of that, that's how the Spirit was working in us and revealing our souls to one another, was so incredible. I think of one moment when one member of our group was not feeling well, and we danced healing energy for her, and the tangibility of the healing Spirit moving through us was amazing.
Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's so rare that we are presented with the opportunity for the body to be the primary vehicle for building community and relationships. That, you know, the body is a form of speaking. It is its own language. And so often we are used to relying on the clarity, the precision, the vocabulary of the spoken word. So we don't feel as facile or as confident with the body. And yet, if we allow it, the body is just as clear and just as powerful and just as rich.
And just as beautiful. And that was also a learning for me, is that my 20 years ago body is very different from my current body. And to be able to move with a group in and acknowledging the beauty in others' bodies also allowed me to claim that beauty in my own body.
And there is something powerful about the movement of the individual body and the movement of the group body. To move together as a group, as becoming one as a group, is a very powerful, what do I say? Makes a very powerful impression. It's a very powerful form of communication and co-being.
So Marcella, you mentioned that the project was completed during the time of COVID. We filmed it in July. Originally the project was not meant to be a screen dance. It was meant to be a live production performed at the Ice House. And of course, COVID continues, and the nature of this delivery is also going to be virtual. And so I think that brings us to our final question, which is, you know, how has the pandemic and our increased screen time affected our relationship with the embodied sacred, with our ability to connect powerfully to one another and to our Creator through the body?
For me, because of how much time we spend doing this, sitting at a screen, I've discovered a path not far from my house where it has a lovely long walking path and a labyrinth that I can walk to, and then walk the labyrinth, which is a body prayer style, and walk back out again. And that has had the advantage of both helping me keep my weight down, but it also it's the loveliness of I'm exercising my body and then using my body in prayer to be very connected to spirit in the midst of nature. Like Jenica was talking about earlier, I cannot help but feel the connection and communication with the sacred in that nature setting. And I also then use my body prayer in between being on Zoom, get up and move all of it and be and do. And I still lead prayer sessions on Zoom with people who have been doing that with me for over a year. And we figured out how to do it on Zoom so that we continue that connection of body, heart, and mind, and be attentive to the mostly unnamed anxiety and grief that surrounds us in pandemic, so that we can be more present and awake, as Marcella said, and really attentive to where is God in the midst of this also.
You know, the mystics knew long ago that we could connect to each other through the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And Teilhard de Chardin, his concept of the noosphere, that we can connect with each other through this noosphere, was a precursor to the internet. Mm-hmm. So we really are connecting in ways that the mystics did. They just couldn't see. They just didn't have the visual. And so I've been so grateful that our program was doing Zoom before COVID. Mm-hmm. And we were engaging body practices online, hands on our heart, hands extended out to each other at the beginning and the end of each session before COVID. And so what I have found with COVID, because I'm teaching all my classes online, including spiritual formation, is just to stay steady, to do my singing bowl, invite the silence, do body prayer. Bodies, the research is showing, don't make a difference whether we're on screen or in person. We do touching the heart. I think, Jenica, you were doing a study you can share about, it activates something that can be lost when we don't have another body in our physical presence. But to engage practices that engage all three centers, even when online, is very viable and even more necessary, I found, than ever before.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, I think that I have had to be way more awake to how my body is connecting with the people on Zoom, and have found, so I've only led spiritual direction mostly on Zoom at this point, and the connections are intense. I mean, it is amazing to feel in my body the other person, and to be able to feel the spirit reaching through the screen and connecting to each other. And what that's also, it's giving me this gift of understanding and knowing these threads of connection that travel through time and space in mysterious ways that we just can't even imagine. And that's a gift that was completely unexpected, you know, such a grace to start to begin to experience the beyond time and space connections that like you said, the mystics have always known, and weird that the cyberspace is what's helping me to know that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and you know, the science that has grown over the last 50 years is now moving into an expression of that powerful connection, that we are all connected to one another, that this appearance of separation is a trick our mind plays on us so that we can function. And I find it quite mysteriously miraculous that the wisdom that was known by the mystics thousands upon thousands of years ago is now coming into scientific awareness. And that another thing that was that sort of dualistic separation of religion and science, it is no longer that way, but that there is an interweaving that changes how we understand who we are and our place in the entire cosmos, and the very presence of God within that, or us within God, but that it's given me some language and ways of being able to teach and speak and share what we know that connects with people who haven't experienced the wisdom yet, but they understand if you start to talk about quantum physics and our now known connection to one another that resonates so deeply with the ancient texts of all faiths. So it's like a coming full circle in a way that we are, we've expanded our consciousness and an awareness to the place that we can honor it all and not be afraid of honoring it all.
Thank you, Maggie, for bringing the science into it. But I also just have to say that again and again, I think, with all of the weight and the suffering and the gravity of the pandemic, that we need to recognize how blessed we are at the same time, and with all these silver linings that, it has presented this opportunity for us to tap into the bigger body, the body, that is all of us together.
I also think it's been helpful for me to recognize how physically being with my soul friends is so important as well. And, I'm missing it and recognizing it and needing it, and no longer taking a hug for granted.
Helping us to realize what's really important. All right, well, with that, I want to thank you all so much for joining me in this discussion. I want to invite us all to take a nice deep breath and exhale, which I probably should have done at the start, since this is all about embodiment. And I want to thank all of those people who are listening in. I hope that this discussion has been helpful. Let's just go ahead and finish by placing one hand on our heart and one hand in the air. Go ahead and breathe in through the palm on your heart, breathing into your spirit. Breathing out through the palm in the air, connecting with your digital community and engaging in that balance, that sacred balance between the you, having the complete knowing that is within you, and the knowing that is gifted by our link into the larger community, the bigger body, the creation that connects us all. And thank you so much. Be well. Go in peace.